Welcome, folks, to the first episode of Hang with Smugmug. I am Rocky Bowles. I'm going to be your moderator this evening. I also am the community director for Smugmug, so I work with all the Smugs. We're going to be doing many more of these throughout the rest of the year, so make sure that you check our Google+, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Let's get started because I am just so excited to introduce you to Jay and Varina Patel. I'm sure most of you know them. They are landscape and nature photographers who get to go and explore the coolest places on Earth, so I consider them very lucky people. Their award-winning work has been featured in Popular Photography, National Geographic, National Parks, and many more. So for our first episode tonight, what we're going to be talking about is the discussion of composition when you're on location. So the Patels are going to share with us a series of images, and they're going to show they make it very exciting and break the rules, which we all need to do every now and again. And then they're also going to show you how others may interpret the images that you take. So the chat is live. And if you have any questions, please feel free to post because I'll feed them into the Patels for you. So I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to let the Patels work their magic.
All right. So introduction.
All right.
You go first.
Yeah, I am Varina Patel. I've been shooting since I was a kid, maybe 13, 14 years old. My dad used to give me his camera and let me use it. It was an old Pentax K1000. So I learned to shoot and use, you know, aperture and shutter speed even when I was a kid. I took my first photography class in 7th grade and learned to process film in the darkroom then. And not that I was very good at it, but I did learn how to do it then. By the time I was in high school, I knew I wanted to be a professional photographer. I started using Photoshop in 1994, and I've been using it ever since as my, well, I shouldn't say ever since. I've been using it ever since, but I started using it as a digital darkroom when I started shooting digital, when I switched from film to digital. I guess that's it. I've been doing this a long time, and I love it. You're up.
All right. I'm Jay Patel. I have not been doing this for a very long time, probably about last 10 years. I exclusively shoot landscapes. I will shoot people on occasions only when I'm obligated to, like, for example, the relatives that are getting married. Hopefully not too many of them, but or the kids on the soccer field.
Yeah.
But I love being out in the nature. My love for photography and my love for nature are sort of tied together. There's nothing exciting than being out in the nature and not having access to the cell phones and the hangouts and just to see the light and the sky and the wildlife and the smells and the sounds and a camera in hand. So before we launch into composition, I just wanted to set some ground rules. For people who are watching us, if you guys do have questions, you can type in the chat window and let us know if you have any questions. And for people who are in the Hangout, while we're talking, please feel free to jump in, ask any questions because we may miss something important that you may ask a question and somebody else may get it.
Yeah, so we're very informal. Just jump right in and say what you want to say. And
anytime if you don't know, if you feel like we don't know what we're talking about, just say so. We're not shy to take criticism.
We can handle it.
So, all right. So let's get started. I am going to go first, and then followed by Varina, and we'll ping pong together. So today's topic is composition, like everybody knows. Now, when we talk about composition, people always think rules of composition. Oh, I know rules of composition. It's so boring. Well, that's really nice. But we want to take the composition topic beyond rules of composition. So in today's presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to present the first couple of slides and get the rules of composition out of the way. And then we will talk about things that you don't always think about in compositions, like mood, intent, contrast, and how to create that with just the composition in your photograph. So let's talk about the rules of composition. So the rules of compositions are fairly basics. You have rule of thirds, diagonal lines, reflections, contrasting colors. So when we look at the rules of composition, when we try to adjust the rules of composition in the field, we don't say, okay, let's just place horizon at the third. What we try to do is, how many rules of composition can we get in a photograph? If I can get 10, 12 rules of composition of photograph, the better. So take a look at this image, and I'll show you what example I'm talking about. So if you look at the rules of composition over here, obvious one is the horizon is placed at the third, upper third. Then you have this composition or the foreground element of interest, which is at the place of the lower third. There are a number of different diagonal lines that are going through the image. One that is formed by the mountains, the reflections, and then there are leading lines. The leading lines are formed by the reflections of the clouds. And then we have used reflections. So we try to use 3, 4, 5 rules of composition in a single image. That is not unusual for the photographs that we take. If you actually flip to our Google Plus page or even our galleries on our websites, you can actually see these being used in our images. So having said that, any questions? All right.
We haven't really gotten into it yet.
All right, so let's go. Marina, you're up.
All right,
Next
so Jay's going to pull
yours.
up one of my shots here. This is a shot from, it's from Horseshoe Bend in Arizona. Wow, little blank there for a second. But one of the things that I like to, remind myself when I'm in the field is that I can break any rule I want. So this is one of those images where I've broken the rule of thirds. I centered the image. It's obviously, perfectly centered. And there are times when that just works better. It works better. If I were to pull this image and try and take that formation and the water that curves around it off to the left or to the right, it would seem like a really unbalanced image. But at the same time, I am using the rule of thirds, because if you take a look at the horizon line, it is actually close to the upper third. I was also careful not to center the sun. I wanted it slightly off center. It's not quite at the third, but it's also not centered, and that helps balance the image because there's this large rock in the lower left-hand corner that starts to get a little bit heavy. So not only am I thinking constantly while I'm out there, and I don't mean to say that I'm doing this in a really active way. This is happening in the back of my mind while I'm setting it up. I'm seeing these things, and I'm shifting because of them, but I'm not necessarily itemizing what I'm doing, right? So, but I'm thinking while I'm out there, all right, how do I get a balanced shot? How do I make sure that this heavy element is balanced by another element? How do I make sure that my shot, which I've decided to center, doesn't become too balanced, right? Sometimes I want it a little off balance. I want it to feel a little less that maybe you haven't thought of. So here's an example of a shot taken with a wide-angle lens in Death Valley National Park. I got really close to the cactus. I got down low on the ground because I wanted that cactus to really fill a large portion of the frame. I used the rule of thirds. It's in the lower right. I put the horizon on the upper third, right? But take a look at Jay's shot from the same thing. Before you switch to that shot, Jay, notice the mountains here on the upper left. They're really not much of a part of the image, right? Notice also how much of the sky this sunrise or sunset rather is, how much of the color is filling the sky, right? And look at the size of the cactus. Okay, so this is again a wide-angle shot. Well, let's take a look at Jay's shot, and I'll let him talk about that.
So this image is about perspective. In the first shot, Varina's perspective was to draw the attention of the viewers on the cactus. And she was when she was at the scene, she saw the cactus and the storm as the primary points of interest. When I was at the same scene, what I could see with my eyes were the mountains and the light. And then there is this beautiful rain cloud that was just showering the mountains up in the distance and being lit up. So I composed my shots for showing the perspective of the mountains in the storm.
So Jay and I often have sort of different views of the same scene. We were standing just a few yards from one another. These are not the same cacti, but they're very similar. They're very close to one another. Jay used a longer lens, and so his perspective is a little bit different from mine. When we use these two images, Jay, will you go back and forth between the two a couple of times so people can see? When I photograph a scene, I'm constantly trying to remove things from the scene. I want less in the scene. The mountains were lovely, but that's not what I wanted to show. I wanted to show the cactus. I wanted it in your face so that it would feel as if, you know, if this were framed on a wall in front of you, you could reach out and touch that cactus. Jay, on the other hand, likes to include as much as possible in his shots. And so he comes away with images that show the scene in all its glory, right? He has the mountains in there, he has the whole storm, not just a part of it, but the whole storm included. That means that the cactus is a smaller part of the image, but that's not necessarily what his image is about. It's about the whole scene, while mine is more about the cactus itself. Okay. One of the things that we do, though, with the wide-angle lenses and what we're trying to accomplish by showing the foreground in a photograph is allowing the viewer to sort of feel like they can walk right into the shot. When you're standing on location, if you're standing there in this location, you can look out in the distance and you can see the mountains and the sky. You can see the cactus at your feet, but you can also see the details in the ground in front of you, right? You can see those little rocks and stones, and you can see all the little bits of debris that's all over the floor of the desert. If I give you that information in a photograph, then it's easier for you to feel as if you're really there. It gives you the information that you would get from your own brain if you were standing there. So we use a lot of foreground elements in our photos in order to give you a sense of place. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later and show you some more examples of that. So, all right, let's talk about contrast. Jay's going to show some examples for that.
So before we move to contrast,
should we ask if there's some questions? Sorry.
Yes, I wanted to ask if there is any question.
We talk too fast.
On your horseshoe shot, I know that, like, with the sun being where it was in the very little section that you had in between the clouds, I mean, how much did you kind of run from, like, all the way to one edge, maybe to the other edge, to kind of off-center that sun?
You know what, I moved about 5 times while I was shooting. It was extremely windy. I was standing very, very close to the edge of a, 1,500-foot drop. So, you know, I'm holding onto my camera. It's as close to the edge as I can get because I need to be able to see downward, right? I mean, we're using my widest angle lens, and I'm still having trouble getting the whole foreground in there. So yeah, I mean, I was going back and forth. I moved to the point where I felt like the sun was as off center as I could get it. Yeah. And this is how I liked it. I didn't really want it to be too far over, but you're right. You only have so much latitude to work with. At some point, you're either going to fall off the cliff or you're just going to have to give up. So,
yeah. The other thing that happens, Toby, is that if you move too far, then the symmetry of the curve is sort of lost.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's why I was thinking. I was like, I mean, it's not like it's just off center. I mean, that's kind of the spot to shoot it from either way. I mean, I've never been there personally, but this is where you see the shots always from.
Part of it is also the way the sun is setting and how long it takes to move, because as it's higher in the sky, its position is shifting. Yeah. Right. So it doesn't just come straight down. Yeah. So I can adjust my shot based on how high the sun is in the sky, and that helped determine, you know, where. When I took the shot, I took several shots, so really it's not about when I took the shot, but which shot I chose.
Exactly.
Right? So yeah, my reasoning for choosing this shot as opposed to some of the others is that that horizon line was higher. I didn't want to be cutting off the foreground. I didn't want to lose any of my circle of water there, right? And I also wanted that sun. I didn't want it too low and I didn't want it too high, but I also didn't want it too centered.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
And would you ever consider using a fisheye for like this type of scene?
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, we would have loved a 14 millimeter instead of 16 that we were shooting.
That's what I was going to ask, if you were using the 14 or the 16. So
this is actually a 10 to 22 on a crop factor camera, so it's a 16.
16.
Yeah.
So
Nikon, Canon.
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 All right.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going to ask on your other two, was when you were using. That was my absolute favorite combo, was the 7D with the 10 to 22. And I was just wondering if on your cactus shot, if that was the combo you used on that as well.
For the cactus shot, this was taken before the 7D came out.
Okay.
I want to say this is the 50D.
Okay, but similar.
Yeah, I think it's the 50D
combo
with the 10 to 22.
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
That's actually one of my favorite combos too, a crop factor with a 10 to 22. The hyperfocal distance is great because I can get so close. You know?
Exactly.
But the two images of cactus show how to select composition based on what you find interesting, right? I found mountains interesting, so I chose a composition based on the mountains and the storm. Varina found cactus interesting, so cactus takes a larger portion of it.
In order to shoot the kind of shot like that, you still have to have the right millimeter of lens to get the composition that you're desiring. So
right, in order to get close enough. I mean, this is again, I believe it's a combination of a crop factor camera with a 10 to 22 lens, and so I was able to get really close to that cactus. I'm less than a foot and a half away.
Yeah.
So there are other aspects of composition that you can actually get. For example, I can use a different millimeter lens and change the direction that I was shooting and draw the focus away from the clouds and the mountains if I wanted to. So it isn't just the lens and the millimeter combination that depends on the composition, but you have to select the composition based on the equipment you have, as well as your intent of what you're trying to show.
I think one of the other things that we should point out is if you compare these two shots, look at Jay's shot, which is on the screen now. Notice how much notice how much midground is visible here. Okay, and then look at the other shot that I took, and notice how I have framed it so the cactus covers up a lot of that midground. I did that by simply crouching down. Right. So I got really low, which made my midground seem to foreshorten. Right. So that's another technique we use all the time. You know, if I have a leading line, I might want to be higher up so I can see the line as it goes off into the distance. If I get down, I'm foreshortening the line a little bit, so it loses a little bit of the depth. But I'm also increasing the unusual perspective if I get down low, so that the closer part of a path is wider and the path in the distance is narrower. So you know, I have to weigh the pros and cons of each of those options. Do I want the enhanced perspective, the enhanced depth that happens when I get really close to my foreground, or do I want the that midground, that stretching out of the midground that I get if I stand up?
Yeah. I have a tendency to belly crawl, so this is interesting for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do that quite often.
Yeah,
too, when
we get really dirty.
Yeah. But
You have to.
Yeah, dirt's good.
But again, it's all about the intent as to what you're trying to do, right?
Yeah, so we don't mean to suggest that there's any right way to do it, except my way is right and Jay's way is wrong. But other than that, I'm kidding. But yeah, so we show those two images because we like both of them. You know.
All right, so let's talk about composition and contrast. So now we're going to talk about the contrast in the scene. One of the ways you can use composition is to create contrast. Now, what do I mean by that? You can select, again, the lens combination, the camera combination, and the terrain that you're given. And then use the light such that the composition you select will automatically create a contrast. So here's a photo we took during one of our workshops, and I was just trying to demonstrate to students what the contrast and composition work together. So we had shot a gorgeous sunrise, and we were waiting for the sun to come up over the mountains.
This is Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, by the way, in Utah.
In Utah. So what happened was we were waiting for the sun to come up, and the sun was going to come up over the ridge. And so we had the students together, and I was trying to show them that, look, if you take a shot right now of that bush, it will look very uninteresting. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, because the light between the bush and the background is absolutely even. There is no differential of light. They're both in shade, and there's nothing going on which is going to be very spectacular. Now, if they were to wait 10 minutes, what will happen is the sun will come up, and for 10 minutes, the bush will be lit up, while the cliffs, which are further towards the mountains, will be in shade. So when you take a photograph of that, what will happen is there will be that intense contrast between the mountains in the back and the bush. And this is what it'll look like. So just by selecting a terrain and a composition where the light is falling on a selected area of the scene, I have created a tonal contrast. And this is what we call a selective tonal contrast. And we will look for terrain features like this that says that, okay, part of the image is in light, other part is in shade. What can we do? How can we use that to create a tonal contrast? Mm-hmm. So this is an example of using composition and the terrain together to create a tonal contrast. Mm-hmm. So before I give it on to Varina, I wanted to ask if there are any questions, because this is a concept which is incredibly simple when you look at it, but when you're on the scene, you need to know quite a few things before you can pull this off.
So one of the things that that you have to deal with when you're shooting a scene like this one, as opposed to the last image that he showed, is that you're dealing with a broader dynamic range, and so all of a sudden you have a more difficult shot to capture. You got to watch for blown highlights. You got to make sure your shadows aren't too dark. On the plus side, of course, you get an image that's a little more striking. The deeper tones seem even darker than they were in the flatter image. The brighter tones seem even brighter, and so it's really striking. But you have to start paying attention to those little details that really make a huge difference. If this shot were blown out, if those yellow leaves were blown, you want to be able to see detail in those areas. It makes a big difference.
All right.
Okay. All right. So contrast is, generally speaking, when people think of contrast, they're thinking of color and they're thinking of tonality, right? Bright versus dark. When I think of contrast, though, I'm not necessarily thinking about those things. I'm thinking about form. I'm thinking about lines. I'm thinking about focus, right? For me, contrast goes way beyond just color and light. So here's a shot. If you look at it, you say there's no contrast here at all, right? I mean, the histogram for this thing is so narrow, it's not even funny, right? Because all it is pretty much the same tone. I took it on an overcast day, intentionally. That's what I wanted. So where's the contrast then?
It looks like it's highlighted.
Highlighted?
Like when you highlight a picture?
Oh, actually, no, it's not. But that's just the photo. It's actually, I should say, this is White Sands National Monument in New Mexico. So the sand is actually white, the sky is a pale blue, and that's the image as it is in reality. It's actually one of my favorites because I really like the subtlety of images like this. They just make me feel nice and peaceful, and I need more of that in my life. So the contrast here is actually in this line that travels through the center of the photo. That's it. That's my contrast. And that's enough for me. I'm happy with that. Right? So this is a contrast of form. Everything else in the image is very smooth. I'm sorry, a contrast of line. Everything else in the image is very smooth. It's very subtle. The colors, everything. And that line really stands out against the background. It lets you put your eye in one place. It means you know where to look. Right? You're following that line right through the image. Okay. So the next shot is another example of contrast, and this is from House on Fire Ruins in Mule Canyon. Is that Utah or Arizona? Utah.
Hey, Varina and Jay.
Yeah.
I'm jumping around all these different screens trying to get people, to get their questions.
Mm-hmm.
So this one's a little bit farther back. Let me see. It was when you had, there was a cactus shot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it says, when you choose between vertical and horizontal frames, and do you have any shots of this cactus scene shot on a vertical?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely, we do. We almost always take both vertical and horizontal shots. In order to pull one of those up, we'd have to go dig through our archives, so we won't do that. But yeah, when we're on location, we will shoot horizontal and vertical if possible. It's not always possible. And the reason is because, we'll have clients come to us and say, hey, we need an image for the cover of our magazine. And in that case, they want a vertical image. They don't want a horizontal image. But then we'll have people who come to us and say, we want an image for a calendar. And in that case, they want a horizontal image more than likely, right? So we have people who come and say, we want this exact photo, only I want to hang it over my fireplace and the wall is shaped, however it's shaped, and it needs to be vertical. And so we'll take this shot vertical as well, so that they have that option. Right?
In fact, more often than not, we'll force a composition both vertical and horizontal.
On the other hand, you will almost never find both of those images in our galleries on our website. One of them is almost always better than the other, in our opinions, right? And since it's our art, we get to decide. But so only one of those images will make it into our galleries. Usually.
Mine, you will find both of them. So the other thing that I
I was going to say, I do have one more question for you. They were asking about what filters do you work with?
That's outside the scope of this discussion, so we will,
it could just
postpone
take
the question.
hours.
Yes.
Okay.
You don't want to go there.
How about this one? How do you meter a shot like this dune one?
That's also outside this.
Like which one?
Okay, love this. Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
The metering, the shot.
Oh, the metering.
That gets into discussion of histograms and.
Oh boy, that's a whole class.
Yeah, it's. You don't
All right, well, we'll
that.
do this. We'll have another hangout with you, so we'll do it again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we'll try and break it up into small bits so that we can cover it in a reasonable amount of time without getting too off topic.
Yeah, for people who are watching this, if you can limit your questions
great.
to composition, you will be able to answer them.
Yeah.
The thing that I wanted to point out about
Thanks.
this image is that a location like this is not conducive to horizontal or vertical shot.
Mm-hmm.
But in spite of that, I actually have a vertical shot from this location.
I do too.
We haven't processed it. Sometimes we'll process it and put it on our gallery. But oftentimes we will not process it. And the only reason for us to force a vertical composition in this is there are magazine covers and things from a perspective of sales that will come looking for a vertical composition, even though it's not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just remember that from a composition standpoint. All right, so we were on
so contrast
of
right?
form.
Okay, so here we are back in Mule Canyon, House on Fire ruins here. So here's a shot where I'm working with contrast of form. Okay, so again, I have an image that's made up for the most part of repeating patterns, right? And I've broken that pattern by throwing the square window in there. right? So I have patterns of the fire on the roof, and then I have the patterns of the bricks on the wall. And the point of interest is very clear here because it's that rectangular shape that doesn't seem to fit. Right? Now, of course, there are other forms of contrast happening too, right? There's the contrast of color. Clearly, the image is very colorful, and the window is not. And of course, there's a contrast of tonality or tone as well, because it's very dark within that window. So I'm working with several different types of contrast here. But the goal with contrast is to determine what the most important object in the scene is. Where do I want your eye to go, right? Where do I want you to end up looking when you look at my work? And then to manipulate my composition or change my composition so that that element that I've chosen as the most important is where your eye is going to end up. And in this case, I'm using contrast to get your eye there. Right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So this process of finding out the most important element in your scene and choosing your composition and the rules and the contrast and the form to direct everybody's attention to that element is called composition with intent. Mm-hmm. So you have an intent in mind, and you're selecting your composition so that that intent is absolutely clear to the viewer, or as clear to the viewer as you possibly can get it. And that is what composition is, that is what is called taking composition to the next level. Rules of the compositions are great, but if you really want your vision to come through, you need to compose photos with an intent.
Mm-hmm.
This is even good for all types of photography, not just landscape.
Yes,
yes,
definitely.
And there is an application to how you art or draw or paint.
Mm-hmm. Right, any form of art, right? We often find that our students, when they start out, are looking to include rules of composition, but not necessarily for a reason. They say to us, well, okay, so should I put this bush in the photo in the lower right? And we say, well, why? What's the point of putting it there? Is there a reason why you want to put it there? Or would it work better for whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish to put it somewhere else? The question is, what are you trying to accomplish with this photo? What do you want me to see when I look at your work? And that's something people don't get right away. You know, what's the point of what I'm trying to create?
So when we go out and shoot on a field, we always, first thing is, what is our intent? What is our vision? What do we want people to see? Mm-hmm. And then we will compose the photos, select the equipment, select the light conditions that will highlight that intent.
So everything else we do in the field is about creating or accomplishing the goal that we've set for ourselves in capturing this image. That doesn't mean that we only have one goal. Maybe we have 10 different things we want to capture. That's certainly the case for this location, where this is one of probably 100 shots I took, because this is such a cool thing. I mean, these ruins are amazing, and the way they light up with the reflected sunlight is just incredible. So, you know, each image that I take, I might have a different intent. In this case, I wanted an extremely simple image with one very clear point of interest.
Now, do you guys do a lot of, like, would you have cropped it differently? Is a lot of your stuff, the intent done after the fact in like Lightroom or Photoshop, or is it all done in camera?
That's a good question.
Both, actually.
Yeah.
There is actually an intent that comes when you're processing the photos as well. But that's kind of out of the scope of this, so we will leave that topic and explore it some other time.
Right. No, I was just curious, though, if each one of these was basically a full frame intent
that
you got captured.
Frame.
Yeah, that you captured on site, or if
no, I think actually your question is very much on topic, as I'm understanding it, at least. I mean, I think that what you intend to do can change, of course, between when you take the photo and when you process it, and also when you look at an image on screen. You know, a two-dimensional photo is very different from a three-dimensional reality, and it takes time to sort of wrap your head around what an image is going to look like. It takes experience, right, before you really know how that three-dimensional scene is going to translate into a two-dimensional photo. And so your intent may be that you're standing there on location and you see something in front of you and you want to capture that. And then you pull it up on your screen and you say, you know, now I'm seeing something different because it looks different. It's a different scene because it's no longer three-dimensional. It changes everything. And so I think being willing to change your intent and also being, you know, taking the time over time, taking the time to use your experience to start to understand what happens when you take a three-dimensional scene and shift it into a two-dimensional image. All those things combine to the point where eventually, if you do it enough, if you're interested enough and that's what you want to do, that you can go out there on location and before you even take out your lens, you know what's going to happen through the lens, three-dimensional to two-dimensional, what's going to happen to the colors and what you're going to want to do with it later in Photoshop. So, but it does take time. I mean, like I said, I've been using Photoshop since 1994, so I know what Photoshop can do. I know how much I can change and whether or not I want to change it. So most of the time I'm trying to get it right in camera, and I think that's true for Jay too. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time we're trying to get as much right in camera as we can. We'll go into Photoshop and make whatever adjustments are necessary.
One of the things you remember is the world don't always fit in 2:3 ratio, right? Mm-hmm. So there are scenes where square composition works out the best or the panorama works out the best. And in that case, you have to go to Photoshop and crop it. Mm-hmm. But our intent at the time when we were shooting that would still be to highlight a certain portion of the scene or create a mood or whatever the case is.
I recently took a photo in a field. I wasn't finding the photo I wanted. I spent an hour and a half, maybe longer, photographing water droplets and flowers, and I was not getting what I wanted. I pulled up an image to process it in Photoshop. I zoomed in to check my sharpness, and there was my photo. It was just like this tiny little section of the whole, and I went, ah, dang it, and I cropped the photo because you know what? That was the photo I wanted. So I'll do it. I don't have anything against that. I wish I'd found it in field, though. You know, I felt like a bit of a failure.
That's okay. It never happens to me.
No.
Ever.
Of course not.
I'm really good.
Yeah, he's really, really good. He's so good at scary. Yeah.
Cool. All right, so let's talk more about intent. So the great thing or the most interesting thing about composition, which is one of the most boring topics in photography, is...
Oh, I so disagree, but go on.
That, well, somebody was telling me that.
Oh, okay. I still disagree.
That one of the cool things about photography is you can actually manipulate people's mood by just composition. Everyone was like, what? I said, I'm serious. You can actually make them feel like they're standing in a gorgeous place or in a dead place. So let's take a look at a series of images. So you go out and shoot a scene like this. And if your intent is to be able to show you're in this lush, humid forest region, you look at the scene, and does it feel like you're in a forest? Does it feel like there is this huge greenery of forest? There is some forest that you can see up here, but the scene is dominated by geology. You have these red streaks going over here, these huge rocks, and these...
And the colors are very brown, right?
Yeah, and there is this... what's kind of rock that
Cleveland shale.
Shale, yeah. So there's a shale rock going. So people are like, wow, look at those red colors, and they're pretty cool. But you never really get a mood for being in a forest or being in a lush green region of some sort. Now, if I were to change the composition and see what feelings evokes, when you see the same shot of the same falls from a different perspective. Now, what do you guys think? Where do you think this was taken? There's the same red streaks, right?
Good call.
Yeah.
We got a smart one.
Yep. Who's at a forest?
That was Toby, I think.
That looks like Oregon or Washington.
Yes.
That is
so,
Ohio.
This is Ohio.
Wow.
This is like about
Yeah.
5 minutes from my work, actually,
Yeah.
maybe 10 minutes.
Interesting.
But
It's pretty cool.
so depending on the composition you select, if your intent is to create a mood of freshness, of being in a forest, you are going to end up selecting a composition, or you should select a composition to convey your intent to the viewers. Okay, so if you end up with this composition, there's nothing wrong with the image. There's no overexposed areas. The shutter speed and the highlights and everything is perfectly exposed. The colors are great, but it doesn't create a mood of you being in a lush forest. So before I go forward, are there any questions on this?
Mm.
This is Blue Hen Falls in Cuyahoga Valley National Park here in Ohio.
Now, we can take this one step further. So when you look at a composition as you compare this photo and this photo, you obviously have a different mood going on in this photo. But look at the areas that are dominated by brown color in here, right? There is this whole rocks that are in the foreground, and then the foreground sort of fans out with brown. Now, the mood of brown is associated with things that are dead, like dying tree limbs or dirt or desert area. The mood for the green color, when you see a fresh greens like this, is associated with what you call a freshness or life. Now, what if I were to select a composition or a shot to fill up the image with green even more? What would it look like? So I don't have a shot from this location based on that.
Mostly because this location doesn't actually get very much more green than it is right there. That is, you know, as green as it gets.
But
that's the best comp you can get.
Yeah, it is. Well,
yeah, sure.
But take a look at this. Now, if you look at the percentage of brown area in here and percentage of brown area in here, there is almost zero brown area. The only little brown area you see over here is here.
So I bet you can guess where this is.
Does anybody know where this is?
It's not Ohio.
It actually was a photo taken at Columbia River Gorge when we went shooting with Brian Matash and Nicole Young and some other G-plussers.
Yeah.
And we were having this talk about mood and composition with intent. And Brian was down here shooting. And my advice to them was that if you want to capture the mood of being in a rainforest, fill your photo up with the colors of the rainforest, which is green. So he said, what do you mean? So I took the shot and saying, here's what I mean. Now, you go from, if you really want to show a forested area that falls in a forest area, if you go to a location like this and shoot a photo where you have a lot of brown space, or even half a brown space like this, you lose that mood of being in a lush Garden of Eden like Columbia River Gorge. So when you compose photo, you compose a photo with intent in mind, and then make sure that that intent is conveyed in your photographs. All right, so before I point out a couple of other things about the photos, I'm going to pause over here. Questions?
We're good.
All right.
I'm doing well.
Okay,
All right.
nothing that we need to answer from the chats or anything like that.
Nope, not right now.
Okay, good.
All right, so let me point
Toby,
out one.
I was going to say, Toby, did you have a question?
Nope.
Okay.
So let me point out something. Do you guys see there is actually a contrast also at play over here? What do you think that is?
The trees in the front right?
No. Think about what contrast, what draws your attention in here?
Well, the waterfall,
Waterfall.
But there's
Why
a
does it
dark.
draw your attention?
because it's white.
Yes.
And mixed, it's like the only other color in the image.
Exactly.
Well, it's
So
just
what we have
color.
done is similar to Varina's tonal contrast, where the only black area in here is the window. What this shows is a contrast of colors between green and white. All right. So remember, we are using other rules of composition and other intent, other tricks for creating intent. It's just that our primary intent was to capture being in a rainforest.
Mm.
All right, let's talk about mood a little more. All right.
So
Ready?
this is just another example of creating mood in a photograph. In this case, once again, I was working under very overcast skies. So I decided to use that. I wanted to create this incredible blue mood. These icebergs were bluish. They had a blue tint to them. The sky was this, heavy, stormy blue. And the ocean was somewhat blue, but as it came forward towards me over black sand, the foam was reflecting the color in the sky, and so it was turning blue too. And I kept noticing that again and again as it was getting darker. It was late in the evening. This is very long shutter speed. And I kept noticing the blue tones, and I said, that's what I want to capture. So I stood by this iceberg for a good half an hour and photographed it again and again and again until I got a shot where the wave came up through the entire scene. I think I got through 2 or 3 waves in this single very long exposure. I think it's a 30-second exposure. I'm not sure. I'd have to check that. But the effect then was to take that dark color of the black sand underneath and the white foam plus the reflection from the sky and the darker tones of the of the evening light, and combine to create this blue image. So the ice, the sky, everything turns very blue. It becomes an incredibly moody shot, and I got rid of any detail in the water with that long shutter speed, of course, right? It blurred it out completely, gave me a silky smooth look, which makes it look even more surreal, as if the weird ice there isn't surreal enough, right?
Yeah.
But this is exactly what I was looking for. It took me about a half an hour to get it, but my goal the entire time was to take this shot. So when I get there, I'm looking for the shot. I know what I want. You just have to figure out how to get it. Right. So once again, it comes back to experience and knowing what your lenses can do and what your camera can do, and what filters you need if you need them, and what kind of shutter speed and so on. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I love that one.
Oh, thanks. It's one I really like too. Okay, so we're going to talk again. We mentioned this briefly before. Foreground elements. So this is a shot from Bryce Canyon National Park in Utah. We got there after driving for a few hours in a nasty snowstorm. And the roads in the park hadn't yet been plowed, so we're driving on our four-wheel drive, making tracks in, 16 inches of fresh
12 to
snow,
16,
12
yeah.
to 16 inches, just gorgeous, gorgeous. And this scene is so incredibly beautiful, but it's a difficult one to photograph. Show me the next photo, Jay. This is one of Jay's shots that we're using for comparison. It's not one that he's particularly thrilled with, but you can see the difference here without that foreground object. So why is it so important, right? I'm just using a tree as a foreground object. But what happens with that tree is it gives you a sense of where you are. It gives you some details about where you are, right? So you're standing in this place, you feel like you can step out into it, into the snow, because you can see the details in the snow and you can see the details in that tree. And it gives you a sense of scale as well, right? Most of us know pretty well the size of a tree. We can tell by looking at it that it's a relatively small tree. It's a little baby tree, right? And then if you look at Jay's shot, you lose that. So how big are those hoodoos in the distance? I don't know. It's hard to tell, right? I give you that tree. It doesn't necessarily tell you exactly how tall they are, but it shows you that they're far away and they're small. And it gives you a really nice counterpoint to what's happening in the background. Do you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Toby. We keep asking at the same time.
Oh, no, I was just saying, well, you got the fog and the sun and...
Yeah.
Oh, we love going to Bryce in winter. It's probably our favorite time to go shoot Bryce.
Yeah.
It looks like it. I've never seen it in winter, actually. Now
Oh, it is breathtaking.
Brilliant. I mean, you can see there's just... It was jaw-dropping. You know, I got out there, I'm standing by the car, I'm putting on 47 layers of clothes because it's freaking cold up there. And I get out there to the ice, I mean, to the trail, sorry, and I forgot I was cold. I mean, my fingers were falling off, but who cares when you're standing in front of that, you know? So, yeah.
It is
cool.
a beautiful shot, but it reminds me of what's coming to my area very soon.
I know, I'm sorry. Us too.
Hey, we live on Snowbelt too.
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
That's
so
right.
I do have a question for you guys. If you have a choice between a shot that is technically good composition and another shot that conveys the mood better, is a weaker composition, what would you do? Did we stump the speakers?
Yeah.
It depends on the scene. It depends on
what we're trying to convey and capture.
Yeah, it really that's a tough one. I think I would probably take both shots and I would agonize over it later on. But I don't know. We're awfully picky. We might not like either of them.
Yep.
Might not be good enough.
The thing is that
That's terrible.
if I'm trying to convey a certain intent, and if the composition is technically incorrect, we will go ahead and take that. And we would have no qualms about processing that. I can tell you there are a number of shots in my galleries that are absolutely stunning in terms of light and colors, but compositionally, they don't follow always the rules. So for example, just like this shot of Varina where she broke the rules of composition, we will technically go ahead and break the rules of composition if the shot requires us to do so. And if we can convey what we're trying to capture with the shot.
So there are a lot of times where we think it looks better. I think maybe the question though is more about, you know, if you prefer one composition but you can't get the mood, or you can get the mood but not the composition you want, you can only choose one or the other. So I don't know. I guess it depends on the location. It depends on what we're trying to accomplish, and I think a lot of times if we can't get the mood and the composition, we're likely to move on and go find another shot.
I was just going to say that.
So.
Nothing. Don't waste your time if there isn't a shot.
Right. It depends on how good it is, though. I mean, if it's a darn good shot and I have to sacrifice a little something, I might take the shot anyway. We'll see.
A lot of times we will visit an area several times during a number of different conditions to be able to take the shot which is perfect. For example, we've been to Bryce, I don't know, 4 or 5 times now.
Yeah.
And we love going there in the winter. So.
Yeah, you guys are probably seeing so many beautiful scenes. You just like, it's not that special anymore.
I don't know.
There's always special. It depends on the light.
Yeah. I haven't gotten too jaded yet. Yeah. I always tell Jay he's jaded, but it's not that bad.
So let's talk about foreground elements a little more. So what about foreground elements that we tend to use is we'll take students to a place like this and say, find an interesting foreground. Now,
this is our challenging location.
What we do is when you come on a workshop with us, which are very rare these days, what we do is we give them a compositional challenge. So if I were to take you to a flat area like this and ask you that I want you to compose something with a leading line. It will be very difficult to do. So we will take students like this and we will say, try composing something with a difference that makes us go, wow. Now, you can have fantastic lighting, but you may not have the foreground object you're looking for. So you just have to then use your imagination to create one.
So this is a cool shot. I mean, you've got a cool location. Nothing better than Badwater, right? In Death Valley. It's so cool. And you have crazy brilliant skies, right? But anybody can take this shot.
So this one was taken by setting up my tripod, extending it full out, and shooting the light. And of course, it's one of my favorite shots. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the shot, technically. But take a look at the next shot that I took from a different perspective.
There you go, vertical.
So here's this vertical shot, and I have horizontal shots too, by the way. But if I were trying to create a leading line in rules of composition to make the shot more interesting, instead of taking a shot from a full extended tripod, I took the shot with as low as my tripod would go and putting a camera vertical using a wide angle. So the foreground objects are inches away from my camera. And what I was able to do with that is I can take any of these ridges and be able to create what we call a leading line.
We should maybe point out that these were not taken on the same day. They are the same location, but the second photograph, that's an entirely different sunset, and there's water on the playa there. So every little hexagon, it has a little pool of water in it, and it's reflecting the light. So, I mean, like I said, crazy beautiful place. And when it does stuff like this, you don't want to leave,
So I love how a lot of your images do use the reflections in the foreground. It's wonderful.
Yeah. We love reflections. They do crazy brilliant stuff to the colors.
Yes, and so coming back to the composition over here is a lot of times you have to force a composition. What I mean by forcing a composition is that if your intent is to draw the attention to the crazy beautiful skies that are going on, and you want to use a leading line when there isn't any, then you have to step out of the box. You have to think creatively. You have to find a unique perspective, get low down on the ground, or put the camera sideways, do something different to be able to create a composition that would engage the viewers. So composition, knowing the rules of composition is great, but taking a composition to a different level requires you to think about mood, intent, perspectives, and creative thinking out of the box to make sure that you can actually come away with a photo which engages the viewer. All right.
All right. So that's the last photo that we have to show you. We I think we did okay. It's 10:10. I guess we went a few minutes over, but but yeah. So where do we want to go from there? Any comments or suggestions for how we could improve our work?
Improve.
I know, I was just going to say improvement. What are you talking?
There's always room for
You
improvement.
stalk a cute kid right in the center of it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no. We leave the cute kids at home when we do this.
That's right.
Otherwise, things will never quite get done.
Yeah.
We'd still be in
just
that
teasing.
car
That's
eating
true.
granola
Mom, I'm
bars.
cold. I'm cold.
Yeah.
I'm teasing. They're fantastic. I just love them.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so we'll let you guys off the hook for right now. And so thank you so much, Varina and Jay, for joining us today, and everyone else that was on YouTube and our little panel that we had here also. So please make sure that you keep up to date with our next episode of Hang with Smugmug, which will be our lucky episode number 2. You'll find more information on G+, Facebook, and Twitter. Please make sure you check out smugmug.com to see all of the features and benefits that we do offer photographers. And while you're there, we do have local user groups that you can get involved in. We call them Smugs or Smugmug user groups. So if you go to smugmug.com/smugs, you'll get some information about maybe a local group that you could join that's close to you. So thank you so much, everybody, again, and have a great night, and we'll hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for
It was
having us.
amazing. I learned so much.
Oh, good. I'm
Great.
glad. Thank you.
Thanks.